Hello, Noah Vortex here. I'm going to do a bit of a late night vlog, so excuse me if my energy levels are a bit down, and also just generally speaking, I'm quite anxious at the minute, which isn't helping with my stream of coherent thoughts, anyway, at least. So I thought I'd just do this is going to be a stream of consciousness vlog, so there's no pre-preparation, just sort of had a thought that something I'm very worried about at the minute. Of course, as pretty much most people are currently in the world, because it's such it's the top of the headlines in the Western media and the Eastern media, is the situation in the Ukraine with Russia and Ukraine and the Russian-backed separatists and Ukraine. So I'm sure everybody knows about the background and context in a broad sense of that, what's going on. But I'll also preface this by saying I'm not an expert on geopolitics. I'm not a political scientist or any sort of analyst. I have an interest in these things and I understand some of the background, but I'm not an expert. So I'll say that. In terms of personal experience, so I lived in Russia for 2 years, so I have some awareness of the culture and the society, but not to the level of a native, obviously. I know a bit of Russian, I know a fair bit about the literature, art and culture and music and everything, but I'm no expert on the intricacies of Russian geopolitics, politics, internal politics, all that. I know a bit about it, I knew some people who knew a lot about all that, actually, to be honest, but most of what I've learnt about that is from them, and it's just been information that you glean bit by bit. Right, so no, I'm not going into this claiming I'm an expert. This is just my perception of it, and it's obviously rapidly evolving at the minute, minute by minute actually now, because it's sort of reaching a fever point now. So obviously it's been, the situation has been, both the West and Russia have been trying to, and Ukraine and Russia have been trying to reach some sort of diplomatic agreement to avoid it escalating into a full-blown invasion of Ukraine, or a full-blown military conflict in the territory of Ukraine. But obviously there has been a bit of a blow to that, potentially. Now we'll see how it pans out tomorrow, but Putin's just basically officially recognised the separatist regions in Russia. And like I said, I'm no expert on all this, but this is not going to play out well with the international community, basically. That's probably the last thing. It's broken the Minsk agreement. It's sort of the last thing that the Europe wants, and Putin's just gone and done it tonight. I watched some of his speech he delivered earlier, and it was I've not really watched the whole thing, but the bits I watched were quite provocative. I mean, equating Ukraine to Nazi, and just a lot of this sort of rhetoric, which was incredibly just a bit inflammatory, to say the least. There's a lot of reports that basically in these separatist regions that there are more tanks and stuff going into those areas now. I'm not on the ground, I don't know exactly what's going on, but in a sense, almost tragically, I'm not really that surprised that this is even happening. So like I said before, I'll just go into my personal experience, just my worries and everything. I should have really talked about this a long time ago, but I never really felt the moment to speak about it, I guess. But so I was in Russia for 2 years. I was working remote, doing dev work, and also was an English teacher, so I was teaching English at camp. And something that gave me a great deal of disquiet, in fact, though, was the evolving, at that time, internal politics in Russia. And I'll talk a little bit about a few of the reasons why that was, and also which had a big factor, actually, to be honest, in why I actually left Russia. I could have stayed there for another year. I can still go to Russia. I've still got a visa for another year. Probably not the best time though right now. But so essentially, there's many reasons. But if you've any knowledge of internal politics and protest politics and activism in Russia, you'll be aware of this figure called Navalny, who was, not so much now unfortunately, though he's still alive frankly, but was basically the main opposition figure to the Putin regime in Russia. The main voice of protest, he wasn't the only person, it was sort of a movement behind him. Broadly, it's a broad movement as well. I don't think you could say it was just one thing or the other. It's like sort of, I guess, I'm not an expert on this again, so don't quote me on it directly, but I guess like a sort of centrist, everything from like centrist to sort of left wing allegiance of people who basically just wanted to oust Putin and introduce democratic reforms, human rights reforms, all this sort of thing in Russia. Because, as anybody knows, Russia has not got a great human rights record. Obviously, for LGBT rights, it's horrendous, and many other things. There's not to mention the crackdown on free press. That was the first thing, right? So Navalny was something I was very aware of, and the protests that were going on against Putin's regime have basically been cracked down on for years, really. And then also while I was there was the protests in Belarus, which were incredibly repressed to the nth degree, like very violently oppressed by the government and police, basically, military state forces there. And the president of Belarus is essentially just a puppet of Putin. It's not even really that. It's not a controversial opinion to say that. It's basically a fact. He's just a puppet of the Putin regime. So what else was worrying me there? There's quite a lot, actually, to be honest. This is half the reason I left, to be honest. A lot of the reasons, one of the main reasons. And also so they have this thing in Russia now called the foreign agent law. So from what I remember, basically it's, obviously it's gagging freedom of the press, but independent media, because there were actually and still are independent media that concentrate on Russia. Anything is now, most of them don't operate in Russia itself. One of the main ones I used to read a lot was Medusa, who I believe, I'm not 100% sure now, I've not checked into this for a while, but I believe they're not even based in Russia anymore, because of the amount of gagging they would get on what they could report on. And the foreign agent law, I believe, would be if you were printing certain lines which were questioning authority, then you'd basically have to put this huge block of text saying that you're basically working for a foreign power. Essentially, they're gagging the freedom of the press to criticise, and there's no real freedom of the press in Russia. There's just state-run media, essentially. So there is no real, there's no free press, basically. RT is obviously not free press. I get really frustrated with sometimes when people even vaguely take RT seriously. I'm British, I'm not going to say that, the BBC are fucking also not propagandists, because yes, they are, of course they are. But two wrongs don't make a right, as it were. So you can be morally consistent in saying that RT is obviously state media. They're always gonna have a explicitly propagandist line. So there's that. Also, I don't know where the things are at with this, to be honest, but they were trying to do introduce a lot of regulations about controlling the internet, controlling what people can access on the internet, and controlling the way the Russian internet operates. Now, to me as a web developer, that was like kryptonite, because if you break the basic core fundamentals of how the internet functions, well, how am I going to do my job? It was just ridiculous. Not to mention, I'm obviously against the notion of, state repression and control of the internet, of a service like the internet. I mean, it's just like, yeah, what they were trying to do is basically create a Russian internet, which would be a sort of closed internet with sort of like Chinese firewall, I guess, so it's like a walled off Russian style internet, only for, just nonsense basically. And then I'm not even talking about, you could say, well, Navalny, of course, was allegedly poisoned, probably by FSB agents. I mean, it does come from the playbook. I mean, it's not that unknown, let's say, that happens, or has been claimed to happen in the past. So that happened, it's like a year and a half ago now, I remember what's going on. And he was flown to Germany, and then he flew back to be treated. It happened in Siberia, and then he went to Germany, and then he flew back to Russia, which is probably not the greatest idea. He got arrested. He's in jail now, I think, for just an extended long period. So when that happened, basically the entire, from what I understand, a lot of the infrastructure of the activist network and the sort of political protest movement in Russia was basically crushed. So the activists, a lot of human rights organisation Memorial was recently closed down a few months ago. So it doesn't bode well, basically. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Putin's head. No one really understands that fully at the minute. I mean, he's being provocative. He's being, I'm not saying that the US is a perfect angel either. I mean, people will talk about how, there's Russia are under threat from NATO bases and all this sort of thing. Yeah, sure, but I mean, they're not threatening to attack Russia. Obviously, the US does not want a war with Russia. They would just literally create the conditions for potentially a nuclear exchange. Why would America escalate that? Why would America want that? All the interesting thing is, like, I mean, this is a 21st century war, so it's information war, really. So there's constant disinformation from both sides, or like maybe potentially even misinformation coming out all the time. And I'm no fan of the CIA. I don't think the CIA are groovy or anything, but also at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of shit happening at the minute. It's almost, and the way that these information wars function in the current culture is that they are designed to elicit emotion. Obviously, I think in a lot of ways the actual way that politicians and these corrupt politicians in a lot of ways convince us as supposedly free-thinking individuals to get on board with whatever narrative they're pushing is emotive language, emotive media stories, emotive. I mean, this is an oft-repeated point actually, but in the past, a lot of news reporting used to be quite drab, and it wasn't really pulling at your heartstrings or making you feel angry. Emotion is an incredibly powerful force in political language, and politicians know that. They're not stupid. They know that they can really just manipulate that and take advantage of people's raw emotions and feelings. They know that that's not that hard to do, and that it's an easy play. And I think that's a lot of what is happening right now. So I know this is a long video, but let's carry on along. So yeah, I mean, obviously last week the US was talking up that basically Russia were going to invade on Wednesday. Didn't happen. I was sort of breathing a sigh of relief, because I was like, okay, the US have completely, amped up the actual threat of this. Maybe they got dodgy intelligence. Maybe they're just playing their own stupid game. Who knows? So I was like, well, okay, it seems like it's all just nonsense and hot air. That was my view a week ago. The situation has significantly changed though now, because with Putin, supporting, or the Russian state supporting and recognizing the separatists independence that basically, well, it throws the diplomatic situation into utter chaos. There are talks, or not talks, but like news coming out, which will remain to see how valid it is, about vehicles pouring into those areas. So I guess the ball now is, of course, is in unfortunately, I wish it fucking wasn't, because he's not the best person to have such a ball in the court, is in Putin's hands. It's in his hands. What is he going to do next? Is he actually going to be so mad as to just trigger a war with Ukraine, who are pretty much brothers with Russia? They're not like, it isn't like they're not like enemies in any sense, really. There's no, I mean, not that I know of anyway. Like, I've always heard, whenever I've heard, I've not heard people, Russians, like, hating Ukrainian people or whatever. Like, and I lived in Russia for 2 years. I mean, obviously there are going to be a variety of political opinions in Russia, and there's a lot, there's a lot of far right extremism even in Russia, relatively speaking, actually, compared to the rest of the world. There is a lot of that, sort of regressive conservatism. I mean, it's not a mass movement, but there is that element there, obviously, as it is in any society. But there is quite a lot of it in some places, and same with Ukraine as well. I'm not going to deny that. There's a lot of historically. It's like a sort of nationalist movement. Again, I'm not an expert on this. This is just, based on my own research, reading in the recent few weeks, really, to be honest, when it comes to more of the history of the politics of Ukraine. But yeah, I don't know. Where do we go from here? I mean, hopefully, I hope that Putin can at least restrain himself a bit. Because the thought of the alternative is pretty fucking horrendous, to be honest. I mean, if they do directly invade the Ukraine, then essentially that's the start of a proxy war of the Western Russia, basically. That is the start of a proxy war between those two powers, if you wanted to. I mean, but the thing is, Russia isn't really a superpower anymore. China is certainly, the US is certainly. Russia doesn't have the same power. I mean, they have a powerful military, they have a lot of resources. But their economy is not great. Their economy is already, the ruble's already tanking a bit, obviously in relation to events. But then they're not as, I mean, obviously it's nowhere near the 90s perestroika days or whatever. Nowhere near like that. Nowhere near. I mean, I lived there for 2 years. In Moscow, admittedly, so it's, it's the city, the urban, the Gorad of Russia, not the rural environments. But it's, it's not that bad. They've got pretty good infrastructure for public services and stuff, and public transport, actually. I don't know about public services. And they have doctors and stuff, but it's not like amazing, but it's there. So they do have infrastructure, and there's a lot of malls actually in Moscow. I started to actually hate going to malls. I mean, I don't know. It was interesting on one level, but I was just like, why am I going to malls in Moscow? There's quite a lot of malls in Moscow, actually. You'd be surprised. They've got this sort of, it's definitely, I mean, this is why I always find it weird when, proper, lefties, defend Russia because they think it's somehow, lefty. It's not at all. It's almost like authoritarian government and capitalist cronyism. It's really not all that. It's nothing left-wing, really, about it, to be honest. I think people just still have this idea of the legacy of the USSR or whatever. Not great legacy, if you're honest, but I don't know. There's no way you could possibly justify an argument to say that Russia is left wing at all. It's not at all. It's quite the opposite, really. It's quite right wing, especially when it comes to social values. It's quite almost like a allegiance you find with the Orthodox Church, and I mean, a lot of when I was there actually in Russia and Moscow. And I'm not saying this is unique to Russia, because we have these sorts of things here as well. But you had like the military marches for the Great Patriotic War and all that sort of thing. There's quite a little bit of an underlying sense of militarism and everything. Well, to be fair, I mean, in what the Russians call the Great Patriotic War of the 1945 and everything, the Russian invasion of Russia, they lost millions. We would all be here probably speaking, we'd be Nazis and speaking, well, probably dead. I mean, I think they'd think I was Jewish, I'd just be killed or something. No, but like, I'm not actually Jewish, but anyway. But not that it matters, really. I'd quite like to be, but I'm not. But anyway, I'm going off on this tangent. But they actually did save the world of their struggle in a lot of ways, and it's often undervalued. So I understand why they quite feel very strongly and patriotic about it, and we do all owe them that for those huge sacrifices, almost incalculable sacrifice that the Russian people made during the Second World War, and we don't often acknowledge it enough. I think we just think all these things. History gets made into propaganda and always gets mythologized, but genuinely the world would be very different if it wasn't for the Soviets defending Russia, basically, in their homeland. But yeah, I don't know, I'm not going to go into that too much. I'll probably leave this video now, actually. So I guess obviously I've talked about my experience living in Russia, why I felt that I could not tolerate living there really much longer due to the political situation. I'm not trying to use this as a justification for, I'm so glad I made the right decision. No, I'm just generally worried, actually. Especially as I was a teacher. I taught students there, some of whom will be even eligible for draft age. So if the conflict gets really bad, that is something that really is playing on my mind at the minute. I would not want to see a single one of my students having to go into a stupid war with people who are basically their brothers, like really not really that. Just, it would be pointless. It would be terrible. That is quite a haunting fact that I'm trying not to think about too much. And also, I still know people in Moscow and Russia, people I'm friends with, and the idea of a conflict which just seems so pointless. I mean, they all are probably on some level, but it's just not a nice thought. But anyway, there's been a bit of an event, I suppose, and trying to analyse and think about what's actually going on here. But I don't usually cover politics really that much, but this is quite an important issue, so I thought I'd just reel off a bunch of thoughts about it. I hope that we can both just find a common peace and some sort of diplomatic solution. I'm feeling less and less optimistic about it though now, to be honest, unfortunately. And at the least, if it does come to conflict, we'll have a proxy war that will be quite fast and brutal, probably, unfortunately. At the very worst, it could turn into something really big. But for now, just, I guess, remain calm, try and remain rational, and until something irrational happens, that's all you can do, really, unfortunately. I'll just sign off with that. I don't think I should go on any longer. Yeah. Peace, man. Peace. Peace, peace, peace. Sounds like I'm saying piss. Peace.